Welcome everyone. In February 21st, the Foreign Policy Research Institute published an article by Colin P. Clark and Jacob Zen titled Jihadist Group in Sub-Saharan Africa, Assessing the Threat. They wrote, as the Biden administration surveys the litany of foreign policy challenges that exist, Iran, China, Russia, North Korea to name a few, counter-terrorism in Sub-Saharan Africa likely falls outside of its top priorities. Throughout the Trump administration, there were high-level discussions on troop redeployments and how best to transition away from counter-terrorism operation in order to prepare for great power competition. Sub-Saharan Africa was expected to be deprioritized more than any other region by these deployments, despite the area becoming fertile ground for jihadist group affiliated with the Islamic State and al-Qaida. In today's program, we will discuss the importance of these threats and what they mean for the U.S. national security. Will the terrorist groups in Africa take advantage of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan to strike our allies from Somalia in the east to the Atlantic coast in the west, not to mention European countries as well? Last week, an armed group intercepted a Moroccan truck on its way to the Malian capital Bamako and killed 2 Moroccan citizens and wounded a third. French President Emmanuel Macron announced that French forces has killed the leader of ISIS organization in the Greater Sahara, Adnan Abu Alidah al-Sahrawi, who is a former member of the separatist group Polisario. The French president said in a tweet, "It is another great success in our war against terrorist groups in the Sahel." We are pleased to have today former U.S. Special Forces Colonel Andrew Milburn. He attended St. Paul's School, University College London, and Westminster University, and he is a former Chief of Staff of Special Operations Command Central. He is on the adjunct faculty of the Joint Special Operations University and teaches classes on leadership and ethics. He also teaches courses overseas to officers from countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And he is a fellow of the Modern War Institute. Andrew, I'm so glad you are here today. Before we talk about the danger of terrorist organizations in Africa, let's start with the news of the killing of Adnan Abu Alidah al-Sahrawi. What is your comment?
Two things, really. I'm going to start with the good news. Okay, so first of all, viscerally, it makes us all feel good to see someone like Adnan Abu Alidah al-Sahrawi dead. As you know, for the benefit of your audience, just a few words about him. I know you know his background. He started off in the Polisario and transferred to actually started ISGS in 2015. And rose to prominence there. He's actually kept a really low profile. So it's been extraordinary work by the French actually locating him and killing him. From a U.S. point of view, the U.S. has a price on his head because he was directly responsible for the death of 4 U.S. soldiers in Niger, in Tulaberi region of Niger in 2017, which was for the United States quite a traumatic incident for a number of reasons. But also since then, he's been responsible for the death of French aid workers and a number of other civilians from several countries. So his death's good news, but decapitation, by that I mean counterterrorism through killing terrorist leaders tends not to work. In fact, does not work. It creates a brief period obviously of faux success. But when you look historically, what's happened to terrorist organizations, don't worry, I'm not going to string this out too long. There's been no case on record of a terrorist organization imploding or even reducing operations from the death of a single leader, or even a series of leaders. And at the most that has happened, we've seen a brief lull in violence. Last thing I'll say, 2 examples: Zakawi. Right, more violence actually spiked in the months and year after Zakawi's death. You can look that up. The number of deaths, coalition and Iraqi civilians, skyrocketed after he was killed, not before. And although Baghdadi, his death came really after the physical caliphate of the Islamic State had been destroyed in any case. And as you and I both know, his death has done nothing to prevent the propagation of the Islamic State's ideology. So, yes, good news, a bad man is removed from the planet. The bad news is kind of, so what? There might have been better ways to do it.
Al-Sahrawi was an active member of the separatist Polisario group before he joined ISIS. He's responsible for the killing of 4 Americans. Taking in consideration the miserable human conditions in Tindouf, can we consider the Polisario camps in the Algerian soil a stronghold of terrorism?
Yes, certainly. I mean, there was last year, I think actually a year ago, there was an Oxfam, so an independent report by a non-governmental organization, an Oxfam report that's cited the dreadful conditions in the camp. By the way, there's 165,000 refugees in the camp in fairly squalid conditions, exacerbated by, as you know, by the COVID pandemic. Obviously, no access to, or little access to vaccines, not enough to ventilators. And so, that the camp has been, for a while, it's been kind of a breeding ground for extremism, as you know. I think, honestly, the Algerian government and obviously the Polisario who administer the camp are directly responsible for that. They've done very little to alleviate the conditions in that camp.
On the 11th of September, unknown persons in Mali killed 2 Moroccan drivers and wounded a 3rd. Investigations are taking place on several levels. Who do you think benefits from obstructing trade between Morocco and the African countries?
Yeah, this was a curious case because although, it happened in Mali, and so you might automatically think that it was ISGS, Islamic State of Greater Sahara. There's some things that occurred here that suggest that the way that these 2 were killed and the victims themselves are not the hallmarks of ISGS. For a start, they were both civilians. I mean, not a military target, but there was, that hasn't mattered to the organization before, but normally they've been quite focused. It's been to send a specific message. But it's hard to realize what message they would want to send to Morocco by killing these 2 drug drivers. I could be wrong. It could simply be, of course, the Moroccan, the route down to West Africa is quite a lucrative commercial trade, and it could simply be that they want to undermine goods coming into Mali because, as conditions become alleviated, that undermines their ability to recruit and all that. But that's a bit of a stretch. So it seems more likely that it was focused specifically on them as Moroccans. And, I'm speculating here. Trust me, I've got no information on this. But when you connect this to, there was an attack on a group of Moroccan truck drivers previously. It was several months ago. And I think it was launched actually out of the refugee camp. So it could possibly be, connected to that. The last thing I'll say is that the 2 guys involved in this attack, if eyewitnesses are to be believed, they don't really appear to be armed and equipped as ISGS. You probably read the reports. They seem to have had quite sophisticated equipment, which would normally place them above ISGS hitmen sent out to kill 2 civilians. So I could well be wrong, but it does suggest that another organization was involved.
Or a state, maybe. If we take in account your long experience in fighting terrorism, it is true that some terrorist groups have turned into a scarecrow in the hands of some African regimes that use them to carry dirty work?
Yeah, we use the term proxy forces, right? And it's not just in Africa. This is common now throughout the world. It's the preferred method of many states. I'll start outside Africa. Iran, for instance, uses proxy forces, the Houthis in Yemen, and also Hezbollah in Syria. But and the Russians use their own proxy forces across Africa and several African nations, most recently actually Mali, and of course infamously the LNA in Libya have been using mercenaries as proxy forces. Algeria has been accused of using the Polisario to further their aims, although it's not clear what their national objectives are, because the Moroccan Sahara was recognized as being, it became almost a moot point for some 3 decades after the ceasefire in I think it was 1991. In 3 decades, there was much reduced violence. So it was kind of simmering resentment, but with outbreak of violence again in November, clearly the Algerian government has been supporting the Polisario as kind of an agent, as a proxy against the Moroccan government.
You visited Somalia on several occasions, and I know that today you published an article on the Somali Islamic youth movement, al-Shabab, which officially announced its association with al-Qaida in 2006. Is this movement now a reality in the Horn of Africa?
Okay, so first part of that question, absolutely a reality. I think certainly there's something that can be done, but I'll start with the first part of the question. Al-Shabaab, the fortunes of Al-Shabaab have gone up and down, but they're a product of the Somali civil war, but nevertheless, as you know, have conducted transnational attacks, mass casualty attacks in Kenya, the Westgate shopping mall perhaps being the most infamous, and against US interests too. There was an attack in Mandabay 2019 that killed several Americans. They've evinced a desire to attack the American homeland. You're probably aware of the plot that was uncovered back in November. But my point is this: just their influence on the Horn of Africa alone threatens international interests, commerce, everything else, stability in that part of the world. There's no doubt about it that since the US withdrawal in January of 2021, al-Shabaab has resurged to prominence. They've taken back many of the key roads, the network of roads outside Mogadishu, and they control much of the countryside that they did not control before. Why should that matter? It should certainly matter. Even if you are any country that as we all do requires that depends to some extent on global commerce and looking to their own stability. It is not good to have, and we've seen this time and time again, you can't just withdraw into your borders and pretend that things are not going on. To your second point, yeah, there are things that can be done. And unfortunately, in the United States right now, we have a very kind of binary focus of isolation or forever wars. And there's a lot of slogans like nation building. But what about just a coherent, mature foreign policy where we're leading with diplomatic, political, economic efforts, aid efforts? Doesn't have to be all US. You can have various aspects of that effort being led by other nations. There are a number of nations involved in coalition to support Somalia right now in Mogadishu. The problem is once the US pulls out, and we only had around 700 troops then, once the US pulls out, that takes away a lot of kind of the moral impetus. We saw this in Afghanistan, right? We only had 2,500 troops there. We pulled them out though, and the whole world came crashing down. Unless we learn our lesson and go back into Somalia, again, it doesn't have to be a forever war. We lost very few people in Somalia using special operations forces, advising and assisting the Somali army, most notably their special operations forces. And then in a coherent effort involving the United Nations, involving the European Union, who are already in the country, and the British, who have said that they want to assist here. There's no reason not to get involved in Somalia. and the cost, the price of not being involved and allowing al-Shabaab to continue to take the cities and who knows, eventually Mogadishu, as they have done before, in the end, it's going to be a much harsher price that everyone will pay for that.
Not too far from Somalia, Libya today is considered a reservoir for various types of heavy weapons, which tempted terrorist groups to seek refuge in this country. Do you think that the threat of terrorism has not left Libya, even if the parties there reached some kind of agreement?
No, the threat certainly hasn't left Libya. I mean, think about it. So the Islamic State in Libya was the strongest franchise for the Islamic State outside Iraq and Syria, up until the ceasefire in Libya last year. And those guys didn't all go away. They are still there. It's still a fractured state. I know, I mean, we'll see what happens, but a lot is going to depend on whether they hold their elections as planned on 24th December this year. I mean, that's step one, right? Just getting a government in place, but they still have a lot to deal with. So they've got the ideology that's out there. They've got a lot of guys who've earned their living fighting for the last 10 years and have known nothing else. They've got a massive amount of weapons, and a lot of those weapons have made their way down to Mali too. So yes, Libya is, to put it very mildly, likely to be problematic going ahead.
Yeah. Going back to the paragraph I read at the beginning of this interview, it is clear that the Sahel region is not a priority for the Biden administration. Do you think that this administration avoids kind of collision with France in the African Sahel region? Or maybe it is a matter of the distribution of roles? What do you think?
No, I think the answer is neither, actually. I think the United States was very happy to have France step into Mali back in 2013. As you probably know, it was a combined effort. It was French boots on the ground, but it was a tremendous American support, and the French will tell you that. Drones, intelligence, logistics, you name it. And so where I see a problem arising now is that we have this reluctance in the aftermath of Afghanistan within the United States to be involved anywhere. And yet the French too are talking about withdrawing from the Sahel. And that's one of the things that bothers me a little bit about the French government's announcement today about Walid al-Sahrawi's death. He was killed back in August. So why are they announcing it now? Maybe as a preliminary to say, hey, listen, our mission is pretty much accomplished here. We took out the leader and now we're going to leave. And things are not better. I mean, look what happened. So there was a brief period where the French was successful, but ISGS and JNIM is the al-Qaida affiliate in Western Africa, have both surged again and have gained considerable ground. So my point is this: that I think we're looking at there being a security vacuum. I think the French are going to consider pulling out very soon, and who knows who will fill that void.
Finally, there are those who believe that the war on terror is a losing battle if it's not strengthened by democracy, human development, and the fight against corruption. Is this thinking correct in your opinion?
Yes, certainly correct. I'd rephrase it a little bit. You've got to restate what I said earlier. You've got to undermine the causes that drive recruitment. These organizations obviously need people. That's their center of gravity. And Islamic State, as you know, attracted somewhere between 30 and 40,000 recruits in Iraq and Syria alone in a period of just 5 years. So you've got to undermine that. And the only way you've got to undermine that is look at what is causing recruitment. And number one is often, and you mentioned democratic governments, but certainly less autocratic governments. You tend to see when you have governments that are not at all democratic, and almost on the verge of tyrannical, certainly that's one thing that feeds extremism, but also economic conditions too, and a sense of political outlet. It's kind of a hierarchy of needs. So I'd say economic conditions above all else, some prospect other than going into an extremist group. And I won't bore you, but I've just been studying foreign fighters. What causes waves of foreign fighters to enlist, to go to hubs, enlist, and go to and go and fight. And smarter people than me have put together studies on how it happens and the trends. And it really all comes back to the fact that these guys are radical. Some of them most of them are radicalized initially for other reasons than ideology itself, if it makes that sense. They're radicalized by anger. They're radicalized by a sense of being disenfranchised at the bottom of the food chain, as it were. And the Islamist extremism offers them a way out. It offers them pride. And until we can replace that, this is going to be a continuing problem.
I have a special and last question for you. Have you ever had a moment when you wished you were not in this job?
Yes, many moments, Mohammed. It's been anyone will tell you it's a hard grind wearing uniform, whatever country you're with. It's not, to say the least, it's not an easy life. We are very separate from mainstream America. We deploy and don't, especially in special operations, don't enjoy the luxuries that US population is used to, and also lives are in danger. But I think, all of that is something we accept. I think, though, that you cannot possibly go through combat, whatever sort of combat, whatever side you're on, and remain unchanged if you started off as a reasonable human being to begin with, And so, yes, certainly there are times where I wished I was doing something else. But what kept me in was perhaps the same thing that keeps you in your profession. It's the people I work with, and you build up a sense of mutual obligation. And in the military, that mutual obligation is particularly strong because literally your lives depend on it. So that level of trust, I have not seen replicated anywhere else. And that camaraderie has certainly kept me going for 31 years until I had to leave.
Andrew, thank you very much for the time you give us, and we hope to benefit from your experience and knowledge in the future. I also thank our viewers, and goodbye.